Hey everyone. So today I was supposed to go fish a new body of water, and the fishing conditions were supposed to be just great. But you know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? I ended up getting sick. So I decided to do some research on Fishfinder battery technology because I plan to surprise myself tomorrow with a brand new fish finder because that's how I am. I'm a giver. So what I'll try to do is detail some of the findings of my research. Now I should let you know that I am by no stretch of the imagination an electrical engineer, but I do know some smart people, and they were able to help me quite a bit. From my research, I came to the conclusion that there are two basic types of battery technology available to the fishermen. You have the old school sealed lead acid type of technology, and I'll abbreviate it going forward as SLA. And then you have the new school lithium based technology. And within the lithium camp, you have sub-technologies like lithium ion, lithium polymer, etc. But for our intents and purposes, I'm just going to call them all lithium. So let's begin with the SLA batteries. And we'll start by listing some of the pros and some of the cons. And in my mind, there's really only one pro, and that is they're cheap and available. This battery here is rated at 12 volts and 7 amp hours, and we'll get more into the amps later. But it's listed on Amazon for 20 bucks. And so the 12 volt 7 amp hour battery is probably your most popular battery, and it's also the battery that Hobie will sell you as part of their kit. But they do come in many shapes and sizes. This one right here is rated at 5 amp hours, as denoted by the 5AH. This one right here is rated at 8 amp hours. And again, the batteries that are rated like 7 to 8 amp hours are probably the most popular size for kayak fishermen. The battery here is rated for 15 amp hours. Now at this point, let's go ahead and list some of the cons of SLA battery technology. Number one, they are heavy. Now I'm guesstimating, but the little 5 amp hour battery on the left is probably over 2 pounds. The 7 amp hour battery in the middle probably weighs over 5 pounds. The 15 amp hour battery on the right, I'm pretty sure weighs close to 9 pounds. In addition, SLA batteries simply will not last as long as their lithium counterparts. And when I say not last as long, I'm not talking about on that particular day. I'm talking about the overall life of the battery. Every battery, regardless of technology, has a finite number of times that it can be charged and discharged. SLA batteries were not designed to be discharged and recharged. They're designed to be used in a system where they are constantly being recharged, typically via an alternator. Lithium batteries, on the other hand, were designed to be constantly discharged and recharged, and that's why they use them in laptops, etc. Now, I can't give you a hard number in terms of how many times any battery can be discharged and recharged, but I can tell you that that X number will be much greater with a lithium battery. Another important note with SLA batteries is if you drain them past 50% capacity, that battery will not bounce back to 100%. Okay, so if you take a battery and drain it to, let's say, 25% capacity, when you recharge it, it may come back at maybe 95%. And if you do this on a regular basis, you will quickly kill your battery. At this point, let me kind of go into the nitty-gritty of battery voltages. Again, I am not a double E guy, so take whatever you see and hear with a grain of salt. And if I post something or say something that's not accurate, go ahead and leave a comment down below. But a brand new 12 volt battery actually will measure out at a little beyond 13 volts. So this battery here is going to measure out at 13.16 volts. Let's compare that to a battery that I've had for maybe about a year. I've tried to take pretty good care of this battery, but again, after a year, After a full charge, it's going to measure out at 12.90 volts. So at this point, you may be thinking that 50% of 12 volts is about 6 volts. And maybe you're thinking, okay, as long as I don't let my battery go below 6 volts, that should be okay. And on top of that, most fish finders will actually shut off at like 10 volts. But that is actually not accurate. As we've seen, a 12 volt battery in pretty good shape is going to measure out as something around 13 volts. And I'm not going to go into the math, but 50% capacity of a battery that measures out at 13 volts is only 12.2 volts. So if you run your fish finder until it dies, and that may be something like 10 volts or so, you're actually draining your 12 volt battery way beyond 50% capacity, and that battery again will not spring back to life at 100%. And so if you really want to try and take care of your SLA battery, you really shouldn't run them beyond 12.2 volts. And I think most fish finders will be able to display the voltage of the battery on the screen somewhere. Having said that, I should note that I don't think the voltage readings on the fish finder are really accurate. So here is a screenshot where I've connected a freshly charged battery that tested out at around 13 volts on my voltmeter. The fish finder, the Garmin, is showing 12.4 volts. So I guess, to be safe, I would set maybe a low voltage alarm, and I know that I can do that on the Garmin, and I might set it at not 12.2 but maybe 12. Alrighty then, that was super boring, but if you are still here, I'm gonna move on to the next topic. Now then, how do we determine which capacity battery we need to buy? Well, that all depends on your fish finder, and I'm gonna use cars and gas tanks as an analogy. So let's say that the car you bought is an economy 4-banger. Now this car is going to sip gas, and so even if you want to drive around all day, you can probably put like a 7-gallon gas tank in here and it'll be fine. The equivalent might be a 4-inch fish finder without any of the bells and whistles like down view and side view. This model is going to sip electricity. In the car world, we use miles per gallon to kind of measure fuel consumption. In the electronics world, it's typically measured in either watts or amps. And we'll use amps because it translates better into battery capacity. So this fish finder might draw maybe half an amp, 0.5 amps per hour. So if you have a battery that is rated for 5 amp hours, in theory, you could probably run it for about 10 hours before the battery dies. By contrast, let's say that you drive an 8-passenger SUV and you've got 8 people in there and you've got the AC blasting in the middle of summer. So this car is probably going to gulp gas, and you're going to need something like a 30-gallon gas tank just to use it all day. The equivalent in the fish finder world might be a 9-inch screen fish finder with all the fixins. And I'm talking about like side view, down view, and you're navigating to a waypoint, basically all the bells and whistles. So this fish finder is probably going to draw maybe 1.5 amps. But in the real world, your fish finder is probably going to be something in between. And I'm going to guesstimate that it'll maybe draw about 1 amp. So assuming that your fish finder draws about 1 amp, if you choose the battery on the left, it'll give you about 4 or 5 hours, which is probably not enough. The battery in the middle is going to give you about 6-7 hours, which is probably fine for the average kayak fishing outing. Battery on the right's probably going to give you about 14-15 hours, probably overkill given the amount or the extra weight that you have to carry. So in summary, 4-inch fish finder, you might go with the battery on the left. Something in the middle, 5 to 7-inch screen, you go with the battery in the middle. And if you have, a fancy 7 to 9-inch screen, you probably are going to have to go with the 15 amp hour battery on the right. Quick note on chargers for the SLA batteries. I would spend the money and buy a decent intelligent charger. I wouldn't entrust my batteries to like the $5-6 eBay trickle chargers. SLA batteries being kind of fickle as they are, you should take care of them with a good charger. Okay, wow, this video is turning out to be a lot more comprehensive than I imagined. So I'm going to try and pick up the pace here. I'm going to move on to lithium technology. And I'm going to, again, begin with listing some of the pros. The obvious pro is that any kind of lithium battery is going to be way lighter than its SLA counterpart. Advantage number 2 is that it's going to last much longer. And again, I'm not talking about longer on the water on a particular day. I'm talking about a much longer useful battery life. Lithium batteries were designed to be drawn down and recharged over and over again, and it handles that stress much more gracefully than the SLA batteries. Okay, let's move on to some of the disadvantages. The obvious con is that they are very expensive. At the same amp hour capacity, lithium is going to cost you roughly 3 times as much. And as you go up in capacity, the gap becomes wider and wider, and sometimes it can cost 8 to 10 times as much. The other big drawback is that under certain conditions, lithium batteries can be more volatile. Just like any other kind of battery, it does not like being drawn down to really low levels or completely dead. And when you try to recharge a completely dead lithium battery, there is sometimes a fire danger. The technology has come a long ways, and the fire danger is really minimal, but it's there. Now the next point, I'm not really going to call it a drawback, but I will tell you that lithium technology really hasn't been adopted by the fish finder community per se. And so finding batteries specifically geared or tailored toward fish finders is kind of difficult to find. And when you do find them, they are pretty expensive. So you're looking at an example of a lithium battery geared toward kayak fishing. It's $219, but it's 1.16 pounds. And to put that into comparison, the SLA battery rated for 15 amp hours is only about $30-35. But of course, that comes at the penalty of weight. The SLA battery is going to weigh about 9-10 pounds. Okay, so at this point, this video is going to kind of stray off the safe and beaten path. And I'm going to start kind of experimenting with some, voltages and whatnot. I should stress that I'm not condoning that you do this. Okay, so don't go off and do this and then get mad at me because you blew something up. So on my Garmin fish finder, the manual says I can feed it anything from 10 to 20 volts. So I was just kind of curious. I mean, 10 to 20 volts, does it really care about where it gets its voltage? In order to find out, I began experimenting with some different power sources. So on the left-hand side, that's a battery holder or case or whatever you want to call it, and it takes the traditional AA, and the battery is an a Sanyo Eneloop nickel metal hydride battery. And with AA batteries, you're going to get a voltage somewhere around 1.3 to 1.5. So if you take about 8 batteries, and let's say they're 1.5, and you put them all together, you should end up with 12 volts, or roughly something in that neighborhood. Now, if at this point I haven't scared you away with my warning, you need to pay attention, because the way you put batteries together matters, okay? There are 2 ways that you can kind of couple batteries. You can go parallel, in which case the voltage remains the same, but the capacity just gets upped. The other way you can do it is in series, which means you basically just add all the voltages, and you're going to end up with more voltage than the individual cells. And you got to know what you're doing, because if you try to feed a electronic device way more voltage than it's rated for, you might blow it up. So do some research, parallel versus series, before you try any of this. So again, you have been warned. All right, on the right hand side, there is another battery holder, and the battery that you're looking at is the lithium ion 18650 battery. And it's a really, really universal power source. The battery on the right, I scavenged out of a laptop battery. So if you take most, maybe all laptops, and you tear the battery compartment apart, you will find it populated by a bunch of those 18650 batteries. As a matter of fact, I've heard that the batteries that are in use for the Prius and Tesla electric cars, if you open that huge battery compartment apart, it's basically populated by a whole gaggle of these 18650 batteries. So the 18650 batteries are rated, I think, somewhere around 4 volts. And so if I take 4 of these batteries and put them into series, okay, that's 4 times 4 volts, and that's 16 volts total. That is, of course, greater than 12 volts, but my Garmin fish finder will, again, you can feed it anything from 10 volts to 20 volts. So this battery pack did work, as did the AA battery pack. But my curiosity did lead me down the road to this page. So here, the battery that you're looking at is a lithium polymer. So basically all lithium technology. And it is meant to be used with RC stuff like airplanes, helicopters, cars, etc. And it is rated for 6,000 milliamp hours, which is the equivalent of 6 amp hours. The voltage is 14.8 volts, which is well within my fish finder's voltage feeding range. And then that took me down another rabbit hole. I got to thinking about the cordless drill batteries that are based on lithium technology. So for example, the battery that you're looking at here is lithium. It's meant for obviously some kind of a cordless power tool. Now, you got to be careful here. Why? Because this one is at 20, it's rated at 20 volts, and the Garmin can take 20 volts. But as you saw, like when I hooked up my SLA battery, my 12 volt, to my voltmeter, it read something like, 13 and small change. In the same way, this battery could measure out to be beyond 20 volts, and it could blow something up. Now, I don't know for sure, but I will not experiment at the very fringe edges of safety. So there's that. But these batteries here are rated at 18 volts. So I would imagine that they might be safe to use on my fish finder, assuming I could, work out the hot and the ground. But that's a video for another day. At this point, my conscience won't allow me to go any further without giving you at least one more caveat. If you want to try any of this stuff at home, get yourself a digital multimeter. They're like super cheap. They're like 20 bucks for a decent one on Amazon. And you'll find that it'll be useful for many projects like this. So do yourself a favor and get something like this. Okay, after all of that, I'm going to circle back to this guy. So this battery again is meant to be used with RC stuff like cars, trucks, etc. The voltage is 14.8, which is well within the limits of the Garmin fish finder. The capacity is 6,000 mAh, which is again 6 amp hours. So if I buy 2 of these guys, okay, and hook them up via parallel, okay, parallel, not series, in theory I should keep the voltage the same at 14.8, but basically double the capacity. And here is the pre-made connector on Amazon, which takes 2 of the RC type batteries and hooks them up in parallel, not series, parallel. And so when it's all said and done, in theory, I should end up with a battery pack that's really lightweight and is rated for 12 amp hours. And there's one more item that you have to purchase to kind of round out the kit. As I mentioned before, I think all of these battery packs have individual lithium cells in them. So you have to buy an intelligent charger that recognizes that, and it tops off each cell accordingly. In the battery world, I think they call that balancing. And so you need an intelligent balancing charger like this one. Wow. So this video went way longer than I would ever imagine a topic like Fishfinder batteries would allow for. But anyways, maybe in the end, if you have the money, you're better off or best off, purchasing one of these pre-made batteries for fish finders. If you are of the curious nature type or DIY type, then you might want to try the RC batteries. But I want to leave you with one more topic. In the past, I used a kind of like a cheapy, they call them like waterproof survival cases or something like that. I really doubt that it was waterproof. The problem with these cases was that the batteries, especially if you're using the SLA type, they're heavy. So if you have like a 15 amp hour battery in here, then it's going to weigh something close to 10 pounds. Even if you are a strong guy, the fact of the matter is you're always or almost always going to have something else in your other hand. And half the time your hands are going to be wet. So eventually you will drop this thing. And they're not really that sturdy. So I went ahead and upgraded to this guy. I think this case was kind of meant to haul around expensive like cameras and stuff like that, but it is nearly bomb-proof. I have no doubt that if I were to drop this thing from say like 10 feet up with a heavy battery in it, it would sustain no injuries whatsoever. On top of that, it has a handle, which is invaluable, right? So even with wet hands, you could easily tote a heavy battery pack around, no problem. Wow, that wraps it up finally. I hope that you found this somewhat useful, and have a great day, and we will see you out on the water.